Hello and welcome to Sunlit Horror, a video series where we discuss the darkest moments in horror seen in the light of day. I'm your host, Anna Studebaker, and today we're talking about monsters that appear during the day. Horror movie monsters can take all kinds of forms, from bloodthirsty beasts to city-destroying kaiju to disease-infecting parasites, just to name a few. I believe one of the most compelling forms a movie monster can take is humanoid. A creature or being that resembles a human but with something slightly off, making them abject or othered, is incredibly effective in disturbing the viewer. This objection can be something as obvious as an apparent physical abnormality or something more subtle, like a strange affect or demeanor. We see this on display in many of the classic monster movies, such as the mangled body of Frankenstein's monster or the bizarre idiosyncrasies of Dracula. These abjections tell us, the viewers, that something is different about this character, that they are not quite like us and therefore we should be wary of them. In addition to this, we also associate monsters with darkness. When we see the sun set in a horror film, we assume the protagonist's safety leaves with it. It's like the classic concept of the monster hiding under the bed or in the closet. A child feels safe alone in their room during the day, but at night when the lights are out, they fear the monster is waiting to strike as soon as they fall asleep. In horror movies, monsters often roam around a dark forest or hide in the shadows waiting to capture their next victim. But what happens when monsters appear in the light of day? I've noticed a trend in some horror movies. When the protagonists encounter a monster during the day, they are either able to escape them without harm, or the monster fails to pose an immediate threat. In this way, the villain's monstrous function is to be a harbinger of what's to come. The mere presence of something human but uncanny in this way serves as a portent of doom. They are not ghosts, but tangible beings that appear out of context. The monster's initial warning in the daylight gives viewers the impression that an inevitable reckoning is coming. If the monster appears to the protagonist in the daytime, the director is playing with convention and sending the message that nothing is off limits. It also begs the question, what will happen to the protagonist later in the film? Even deeper than that, a monster appearing during the day can signify a repression coming to the surface. They are an omen, but also a metaphor of past evils, mistakes, or transgressions coming to light. I want to point to some examples of horror movie monsters showing themselves in the day, and what deeper meaning that can represent in the respective storylines. Just a warning, there may be some spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen one of these movies, go ahead and skip ahead to the next example. The first scene I'd like to discuss is from 1978's Halloween. In Halloween, director John Carpenter establishes Michael Myers as a human with monstrous capabilities. He is a sociopathic killer who, as a child, murders his own sister and cannot be reformed despite the constant efforts of his psychiatrist, Dr. Loomis, over the course of 15 years. He returns to Haddonfield with a vengeance in his iconic white mask and is in a state of perpetual silence, both of which serve as indicators of his abjection. I'd like to argue that one of the most memorable scenes in horror, sunlit or otherwise, is Michael Myers half hidden by suburban shrubbery in the middle of the day. In his article titled Holy Terror, Confronting Our Fears and Loving Our Movie Monsters, writer Craig Detweiler says, "The monstrous springs from the Latin word monstrum, meaning that which appears or reveals itself. Demonstration is rooted in the concept of monstrum." So the act of Michael Myers revealing himself to Laurie Strode in daylight, fully lit by the sun, is an act of monstrous intimidation. This is a concept that applies to all the examples I discussed in this episode. Michael appearing to Laurie serves as a warning to her that she and the people of Haddonfield are in danger. His constant looming presence throughout the day builds the tension of what is to come at night. As a larger metaphor, his roaming around Haddonfield during the day could be an allegory for the serial killers that were seemingly running rampant in America in the 70s. They could be roaming around any small town undetected, preying on members of the community. In a more general sense, it can represent how trauma is recurring and can emerge with or result in disastrous consequences if not properly addressed. My next example comes from 2019's Us. In Us, the supposed monsters of the film are the tethered, human clones who are products of a failed government experiment. They are doppelgangers or shadows of the main characters, the Wilson family, and are forced to live underground, unseen by those living on the surface. They are the perfect example of the abject, human-like monster. They look exactly like the protagonists, only with something slightly off about them. Red's raspy way of speaking, Abraham's unintelligible bellowing, Pluto's dog-like behavior, and Umbre's unblinking stare and too large smile. But before the Wilson family meets their own doppelgangers, the son Jason encounters a tethered earlier that day on the beach. The tethered is standing oddly, scarecrow-like, with its arms outstretched, dressed in a strange, shabby outfit with blood ominously dripping from its right hand. In Holy Terror, Detweiler also mentions director Jordan Peele's creation of the tethered as a metaphor. He writes, "For Peele, the tethered are a representation of the guilt, the trauma, the fear, the hatred that might be buried underneath layers of pleasantry. All the stuff that we don't deal with as Americans." For a lot of Americans regarding many of the issues we have in this country, be it homelessness, poverty, discrimination, or racism, just to name a few, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. The tethered appearing in the day is a symbol of moral corruption or willful ignorance being exposed, systemic issues being seen and not shoved underground into the dark and ignored. Peele himself says, "This movie is about maybe the monster is you. It's about us, looking at ourselves as individuals and as a group. The tethered literally emerging from the dark and coming into the light represents the ramifications of the choices made by characters in the film and by real-life Americans being revealed." Our next example of monsters appearing in the day comes from 2014's It Follows. The eponymous It in this film is a curse passed on from person to person through sex. It takes the form of a humanoid shapeshifter that will follow you wherever you go until it catches and kills you. You can't kill it. The only thing you can do to get rid of it is to pass it on to someone else. It looks like a seemingly normal person and can even appear as someone who is well known by the person who is cursed. But it is made abject by its strange behavior and can also be further othered by appearing nude or disheveled in some way. In a scene remarkably similar to the one in Halloween where Laurie is staring out the window, the protagonist Jay sees what appears to be an elderly woman steadily approaching her classroom window, staring fixed in her direction. The kicker of the curse is that no one else can see it. Only the person affected is able to see it coming for them. This convention eliminates the possibility to confide in others to confirm what you see. It is you and you alone who perceives the threat approaching. This can be a direct analogy for sexually transmitted infections, because the way to pass it on is by sleeping with someone else. Or it could be a broader representation of battles people may be fighting that are unseen by others. That could be anything from illnesses with no external symptoms, to psychological disorders, to interpersonal struggles with friends or family. These issues, like the It, can affect you at any time, even during the day. And when it does disturb you during the day, it can affect your ability to function normally. But the painful reality is that you're the only one who sees or is affected by it. Even in the light of day, it is unseen by others. And the final scene I'll be discussing is from 1968's Night of the Living Dead. In the film, the zombies, or ghouls as director George A. Romero originally called them, are, as he envisioned, the dead walking the earth. They have the appalling appearance of decomposition and move as if affected by rigor mortis. But they still look like humans. Although the first zombie the protagonists initially encounter at the beginning of the film does eventually attack, when they first spot it, they think it's just an old man roaming around the graveyard. That lone zombie is a signal or warning of the zombie horde that will later descend upon the farmhouse that shelters the protagonist when the sun sets. In his article titled Demons by Daylight, journalist and film critic Kim Newman states, "Of course, Night of the Living Dead is full of nighttime horrors, but the shock opening and closing of George A. Romero's film take place before dusk and after dawn. in the gray light that indicates the depth of the problem of flesh-eating ghouls that don't evaporate at the crack of dawn like Count Orlok in Nosferatu. Romero himself is quoted saying, "This extraordinary thing that was beyond the character's understanding is happening, and people are still arguing about upstairs, downstairs, who's the boss. They're still arguing about their own agenda instead of facing the problem. And that's really what all my zombie films have been about." There have been many interpretations of this film, from it being a critique of the Vietnam War to a comment on race relations in America at the time. I believe we can interpret this opening scene as humans being confronted with a problem and trying to escape it, but eventually we will have to deal with the consequences. In closing, I want to point out something that author Stephen T. Osama points out in his article, Monsters on the Brain, An Epistemology of Horror. The horror story is probably a permanent player in the moral imagination because human vulnerability is permanent. The monster is a beneficial foe, helping us to virtually represent the obstacles that real life will surely send our way. As long as there are real enemies in the world, there will be useful dramatic versions of them in our heads. When these horrors appear as monsters in the daylight, the protagonist is faced with their presence head-on, with no darkness or shadows to obstruct their view. And if they are confident in their own sanity, they then have to question, why am I seeing this? Why does this unnerve me? Or am I in danger? It also leaves viewers to wonder, why is this significant in the context of the film, but also in a broader sense? What does it imply in broader terms? If you know of any other horror movies where monsters appear in the day, please let me know by commenting below. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day and stay sunny.